Hello and welcome. After nearly 8 months into the global pandemic, COVID-19 has claimed over 1.1 million lives worldwide, 1,17,000 lives in India. Where do we stand right now? Are we at a crossroads? Are we at a critical juncture? What do we need to do to protect ourselves, to continue to protect ourselves and our loved ones? Let's ask Dr. Randeep Guleria, the Director of the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. Thank you, Dr. Guleria, as usual, for your time. We appreciate it. If I could start just by asking you to help us understand the India coronavirus numbers right now. India coronavirus numbers explained, perhaps you can call it that. This week, we saw a major drop in active cases. They've declined in every major state except Delhi and West Bengal. Even Kerala, the fastest growing state right now, has seen a small drop in active cases. We're saying the active cases are now more than 3 lakh lower than the peak that was achieved in the middle of September, and there have only been 5 days since September 17th when the detection of new infections has exceeded the number of people recovering from the disease. So let's try and start the show on a positive note, I hope, but let me ask you, Dr. Guleria, what are we to make of these figures? What does this even mean?
So I think what this means is that we've reached a stage where there is some sort of a plateau as far as the curve is concerned. And that spike and that concern that we would continue to have an increasing trend in cases even going up to 1.5 to 2 lakh cases per day currently has been put on hold. And we have now been able to achieve some degree of stability because the number of tests have gone up. But as you rightly said, the number of positive cases and the recovery rate has both sort of shown a good trend. The challenge that I see is how do we sustain this and how do we continue to bring it down further? What is happening across the world and especially in Europe is that they were not able to sustain this and there was a subsequent increase in the number of cases. And that is related to multiple factors. But I think one of the major factors that is really playing a role is human behavior. And we have to really work on a strategy. How do we make people understand that although the cases are coming down, we're still not out of the woods, and we still have to continue very aggressively to have COVID appropriate behavior, along with the economy opening up, us trying to get back to normal as much as possible. That balance is becoming a big challenge.
So you say, how do we sustain this? And you're right, because there is this, not complacency, but also we're fatigued. COVID fatigue starts to set in. This at the same time that we're seeing pollution on the rise in Delhi. We're seeing the festive season starting. So this is a triple whammy in a sense. Delhi somehow has been continuing this upward trend for more than a week now. It is in the third phase of a rise happening in Delhi. In the second phase, it had touched a high of almost 4,500 new cases a day before declining to almost 2,000 a day. For the last 8 days, its daily detections have once again been over 3,000. And we have also, so what do we make of those numbers? Why is Delhi standing out differently, Delhi and West Bengal? And I have a tweet that has come in from on Twitter. Karthik KG Ganeshan is asking you, can you ask Dr. Guleria about the Delhi numbers? What is causing the successive waves to peak at higher levels?
So I think Delhi numbers are a little bit of a concern because after having got control of the second peak that we saw, the numbers have started coming down, and as you rightly said, they had come down to less than 2,000. But over the last 7 days, there is a slight blip which suggests the numbers are increasing. And I think this is related again to multiple factors, the festive season, movement that is happening, and like you said, COVID fatigue. So there has to be a strategy which has to try and address these issues. And we have to really be able to impress upon every citizen that we still haven't got over it. And whatever we do today in terms of crowding, in terms of having events which can lead to super spreading of the disease, we will see the effect in the coming 2 weeks or so. So this is why what is happening in Delhi is a reflection of what happened a few days before the peak has started. And I think it just shows that we have been complacent. We have really not been as aggressive as we need to continue to be. And this is a lesson for the entire country that we have to be very, very careful. A slight laxity can lead to a surge in the cases and increase in the number as we're saying in Delhi.
All right, good note of caution and precautions that one need to take. Dr. Guleria, let's move to other issues, international issues right now. A volunteer in Brazil participating in the trials at the Oxford University and AstraZeneca vaccine candidate died this week. So, is this a blow for the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine? It was considered to be one of the front runners, at the forefront, that everybody was really hopeful about.
We need to really see what was the cause of death. There has to be a detailed evaluation by the Data Safety Monitoring Board, because it could be unrelated to the vaccine per se. It could be a cause which the individual was already suffering from, or he may have developed, which was not related to the vaccine. If it is vaccine related, then there needs to be a detailed evaluation before the vaccine trial moves forward, because as we've been saying, the foremost thing for any vaccine is that it has to be safe. Before it comes out, everyone has to have that confidence that this is a safe vaccine and can be safely given to a large number of healthy individuals without any fear that it will lead to significant side effects. Therefore, if there has been a death, that needs to be evaluated very, very thoroughly to see whether it is vaccine related, and if it is vaccine related, what are the corrective measures that need to be taken.
Okay, let's look at some other numbers and ask you to analyze this data story. With over 700,000 cured cases, India's COVID recovery rate we're reporting is nearing 90%. That India on Friday conducted 1,269,000 and more coronavirus tests. And the test positivity rate on Thursday was 4.2. So this now leads us to a new phase, that we have a large percentage of people who have contracted and have recovered from COVID. So let's focus on them next. What does one need to do if you have contracted and recovered?
So I think this is becoming a big issue in terms of what we call post-COVID sequelae. How many individuals develop it and what do we need to do, even if you're all right? And what we're observing is that we did know in the past that most individuals who were in the ICU and came out of COVID infection when they were critically ill did have post-COVID sequelae in terms of weakness, fatigue. Some had breathlessness requiring oxygen and other supportive treatment. But we're also now seeing that even individuals with mild to moderate disease, many who were actually not even admitted or were on home quarantine or home isolation, are also having some degree of fatigue, body aches, malaise, a term which is being used, brain fog, and also complaining of dry, irritating cough, which goes on for almost 6 to 8 weeks. So there is a lot of post-COVID sequelae now that we're seeing in a large number of individuals who are recovered from COVID. And that is why I keep saying that one needs to really be very careful. Don't consider this as a mild disease, even if you're young, and saying that you will come out of it, because sometimes the sequelae can cause you a lot of problems for even about 4 to 6 months. And some of them have long-term damage to the heart or the lung or other organs, which can actually affect the quality of life for many, many years to come.
So these lung function tests need to be done regularly, even if you'd had a mild infection. We're getting someone asking that question, or if you were at home isolation.
So what we do is we have a questionnaire, and this is done by most hospitals which have as a post-COVID sequelae clinic. They would initially evaluate individuals by teleconsultation, asking for symptoms if they have. And if they feel there are symptoms which need evaluation, which could relate from lung function to cardiac evaluation to evaluation from the neurological point of view, or a general examination or general blood test, then that is recommended. And if there is a need for a physical visit, then individuals are asked to come for a physical visit to really evaluate them. Many of them need supportive treatment and what we call rehabilitation in terms of exercise, yoga, breathing exercise, and some dietary support to really recover quickly and get their strength back as far as the post-COVID sequelae is concerned.
All right, doctor, let me ask you about COVID immunity. You hear of this so much now, where there are so many persons who have recovered. Everybody says, oh, now I have immunity, so maybe I can live a free life for a few months. How long does this COVID immunity actually last?
So this is a big question, because even in patients whom we are following up for quite some time, we find that the antibodies do develop, but in some of them, the antibodies start decreasing after 3 to 4 months. And therefore, we're concerned that how long will these antibodies be able to protect the individual after he has had COVID infection. And this has a huge implication. But we also know that besides the antibodies, we also have what we call T cell immunity, and that may still be able to give protection for a longer period of time. But I think this is something that people need to be wary of, because we are having now, although in very small numbers, reports of reinfection occurring in individuals almost about 4 to 5 months after they've recovered. And this is something that needs to be looked at. That is it a subset of individuals who don't develop that robust degree of immunity after having COVID, and are they more prone to reinfection? We need to really look at that, and the coming months will be crucial to evaluate this from the research point of view, because this has implication on how frequently the vaccine may be required.
All right. So, and another practical question a viewer sending us in that's on people's minds, though of course changing now as the weather is getting closer up in the north, colder. Concerns raised about whether you're living in a room where the air conditioning is on. Is that an area, a cause of concern?
So two factors. One is the weather. There is definite evidence that respiratory viral infections increase during the winter months. And we've seen that in North India, even when we looked at data for H1N1, which is swine flu. And COVID-19 is also a respiratory infection. So there is a feeling that this will also increase as far as the winter months is concerned. And we are seeing spikes also in Europe as winter is setting in there. The reason for this is basically related to the fact that the virus can survive in the environment, in a colder environment, for a longer period of time. And once we're indoor, because in a colder environment, we tend to be indoor more often than outdoor. And once we're indoor, we don't have that much of good cross ventilation. And whether we have the AC on or whether we're not having the AC on, but if there's not a good amount of cross ventilation, we're all sitting together or crowded together, then passing the infection from one individual to the other becomes easy. It's a very conducive environment for the virus, and that leads to a spike in number of cases. And we're seeing that now, that one individual gets infected, and within a matter of a few days, everyone in the family turns out to be positive. And that's because they're all sitting together, they're crowding together. As the weather is changing, you're tending to sit more inside. So I think it's something that we need to keep in mind. And for me, the concern also is the rising level of air pollution, especially in northern India, because there is data both from the SARS outbreak, which happened in 2002, and the recent data from Italy, which shows that when you have higher levels of air pollution, especially PM 2.5, then you will see an increased severity in the number of in COVID infection. So more severe infection occurs when air pollution tends to increase.
I hope our planners are listening to this interview, because this is a problem we see every year at this point of time, and we cry ourselves hoarse, which actually we cough ourselves hoarse, but policy planners don't seem to be aware or bother. Let's go in for a Twitter question. I have someone who's asking, can a person be affected by an asymptomatic person if both are wearing masks and there is no sneezing?
So there are three factors which decide whether an asymptomatic person can infect others. One is if both are wearing masks, the chance of infection becomes much lower in terms of infectivity if both the person who is infectious is wearing a mask, even if he's asymptomatic, and the person who is not infectious is also wearing a mask. Second is the duration of contact. If the duration of contact is less than 15 minutes, the chance of infection is much lower. And the third is the distance between the two individuals. If the distance between the two individuals is more than 2 meters, then the chance of infectivity is very, very low. So if all of these three factors are there, then we consider this as a low risk, and we reassure these individuals that you have a very low risk of getting the infection. The highest risk is if all these three factors are not there. People have sat together for half an hour, put their mask down, shared a meal or a drink, and have had a very close distance, very high chance of getting infection.
All right, let's look at questions 6 and 7 that are coming in right now, because the other concern on everybody's mind is this vaccine. Of course, you know the whole controversy this week where announcements and statements were made that certain states would perhaps get priority. As Fareed Zakaria says in his book, the world could now be divided on a new front. of inequality of countries that have the vaccine, countries that don't have the vaccine, and people in the country who have the vaccine and who don't have the vaccine. But Dr. Guleria, as a man of science, as a doctor, perhaps you can explain to us, and if any of these policy planners are watching, that unless everybody has a vaccine, none of us are really safe. Is that correct?
Correct. So I think it's very important to understand that if we want to get a hold of the pandemic, if we want to decrease the number of cases in the pandemic significantly, and if we want to decrease the mortality, vaccine has to be across the board for those who are having a higher chance of getting the infection and those who are having a higher chance of dying because of the infection. And this doesn't matter on where you come from, what is your socioeconomic status, or which country you belong to. Because we must also keep in mind that the world is a small place. It's a global village. People, if you vaccinate one country, but there are people who are traveling and they come in the incubation period, they will spread the infection to the other country also. So we have to look at a global vaccine plan and seeing that there is equity, it's given to everyone, because our aim is not to protect an individual. Our aim is to protect society and bring the pandemic under control, and this will be useful for everyone. So if a select group takes the vaccine and others don't get it, it will be counterproductive for the entire effort of bringing the pandemic under control and decreasing the mortality. There has to be understanding that unless vaccine is provided in a manner that is for those who are at high risk of transmitting the infection or getting the infection, and those who have a higher risk of dying because of it, we will not be able to really control this pandemic. It will continue to spread if we have a bias as far as the vaccine policy is concerned.
Okay, so let me then ask you a question that's flashing on the screen right now. What then kind of arrangements need to be made for the distribution of the vaccine? Because we're seeing the first coronavirus vaccine, of sorts being produced. They're all working towards them across the world, raising hopes of a global fight back against the pandemic, that perhaps it could soon be under the way. But would this technically be a vaccine? Because we only, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor, we've only had one vaccine that has actually worked in eradicating, this kind of a virus, or would it just be like a shot that you have to keep taking, like a flu shot, that you have to repeatedly take it against coronavirus?
So it's likely that in the beginning we may have to take more than one shots, and most of the vaccine currently will have one shot and a booster after 28 days. And we're looking at data to see how long this immunity lasts. Do you need another booster later on? But there are 2 or 3 things to remember. One is, this is the first time in the history that so many vaccines are being tried out. We have almost 10 vaccines which are in phase 2, phase 3 trials. And we have now over 100 vaccine candidates which are being looked at from different angles, from messenger RNA to different types of vaccine platforms. And therefore, it's likely that we may have a number of vaccines which may come into the market, and there may be some sort of understanding which vaccine is better. It's likely that the first vaccine which comes out may not be the best. We may have a vaccine which may come months or months later, which may turn out to be more efficacious and giving immunity for a longer period of time. So we have to keep continuing the vaccine research to find which is the best vaccine. It should not be that the good should not become the enemy of the best in that manner, and we must continue finding a vaccine which is effective. I personally feel that over a period of time we will probably have more than one vaccine, and that will help both in terms of deciding how to position them. In my mind, what would be very interesting is to see whether a combination of vaccines will give more immunity. Do we give one vaccine today and then we do give another one after some time, and will that give more lasting immunity? So a lot of research questions as far as the vaccines are concerned, but I think it will take at least a year to be able to really have clarity on this.
Dr. Guleria, thank you as usual for your time. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next week. So all our viewers, keep your questions coming. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.